12 years after the release of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, on Saturday, July 10, 1976, at about 12:30 p.m., an explosion took place at Maida Chemical Industries Limited Company in the northern Italian town of Seveso. The factory used the chemical trichlorophenol to make antibacterial surgical soap. However, when the chemical is heated to about 200 degrees Celsius, it can form dioxin. Maida Chemical Industries Limited Company had an unreacted solution in one of their reactors, which heated the inside TPT, forming dioxin. The explosion blew the safety valve, which discharged the dioxin directly into the atmosphere. A white cloud of dioxin formed over the factory and was carried by a mild breeze over the industrial suburb of Seveso. It would be weeks until the rest of the story about the disaster that was Seveso is a story about who knew what and when. The authorities abused their power by neglecting time, environmental impacts, and international relations. These 16,000 residents would realize they were living amongst one of the deadly chemicals Rachel Carson warned them about. The dioxin began to leak and disperse on Saturday afternoon, meaning the chemical had settled to the ground by Sunday. Many families in Italy, which was a predominantly Christian country, had a tradition of preparing a large family meal on Sunday nights. Many components of these meals came from the gardens and livestock local families cared for. At this point in time, the director of productions of the chemical factory had told the mayors of surrounding areas that the white-gray cloud was from an aerosol mixture that might have had some toxic substance. The company took samples and sent them to Switzerland to be tested. They had also requested that citizens be told not to eat local fruits and vegetables. However, regional officials were uncertain about the extent of the cloud, so they told no one. This is the first example of how authorities abused their power and withheld important information regarding the public safety. On July 11th, many people woke up to an acrid smell. However, no one had felt they had reason to be alarmed. Throughout the day, children played outside, people gathered vegetables, chickens, and rabbits from their gardens for Sunday dinner. As many families sat down to eat, what they did not know is the food they were consuming was contaminated with dioxin. On Monday, July 12th, workers returned to the plant and complained of headaches, nausea, and burning sensations. A local health officer inspected the plant and informed provincial authorities that there was no risk to people in the area. The factory manager misrepresented the situation by confirming that chlorinated phenols were present in the cloud but failing to mention the presence of dioxin. It was not until 1 week after the dioxin was leaked into the environment that people were starting to take notice. Workers had still been complaining of headaches and nausea and took matters into their own hands by hanging up signs around the factory that read things such as "Danger area, contaminated, do not eat vegetables, fruit, or animals that eat grass from the ground." This is also the first time residents learned that food they had been consuming for a week might have been contaminated. The company began to feel public pressure to act on the disaster. Factory workers sampled soil farther and farther from the plant and found high levels of dioxin, but there was randomness to their positive results. This is because the dioxin was carried by the weather. There was consistent advice to evacuate the surrounding areas. Additionally, the press was starting to incorporate stories about dioxin into local papers. With this, panic began to spread in Seveso. Shockingly, 1 more week would pass until evacuations were initiated. This wasted time could have prevented the disaster from escalating. The authorities' inability to act quickly on the matter resulted in a more devastated environment, leading to greater health impacts on the people who live in that environment. The authorities abused their power by neglecting to understand and address the lasting environmental damage. When the cleanup finally began surrounding the town of Seveso, crews were told to slaughter all the animals in the area. More consideration could have been. Only clusters of the animals were tested before being killed. If only the animals were tested positive for dioxin were slaughtered, then some could have been saved. Regardless, there's no way that authorities could have ensured that every animal that was infected with dioxin was exterminated. If the cleanup of the dioxin had begun sooner, then not as many animals would have been affected. The lack of communication regarding the amount of dioxin released from the plant or the results of samples taken throughout surrounding areas was a major factor for why there was not a more reliable environmental cleanup plan. The environmental degradation had a direct connection with the human health outcomes. The longer authorities neglected responsibilities towards the population and their environment, the impact of dioxin on the Seveso residents became more detrimental. Seveso residents suffered many physical and mental impacts from the exposure to dioxin, such as cancer, chloracne, dementia, birth defects, and more. Again, the extent to which these effects were experienced could have been mitigated if the authorities took action as soon as they became aware the dioxin was released into the environment. It did become mandatory that each person believed to be exposed to the chemical had to be examined by a doctor. However, it took too long to implement this regulation. It should have been put in place as soon as the factory officials realized the threat of dioxin. The time required for healing within the citizenry and research throughout the environment would have been greatly reduced. As stories of dioxin and Seveso spread internationally, more and more negative side effects of the chemical became public, and the image of the company and consequently the country was tarnished. It was especially detrimental to the standing of Italy within the international community when 41 barrels of dioxin from the cleanup went missing. Rumors of the barrels being moved to multiple countries in Europe initiated a European freakout. The media eagerly reported any speculative story about the whereabouts of the toxin barrels. This was a result of poor communication between people of power and the locals. Daily assemblies would draw in larger audiences to brief them on the progress of the disaster mitigation. They were run inefficiently and only confused the media even more. Stories alternated between reassuring statements and announcements of authorities' inability to take effective action. The international press would also release inaccurate information, contributing to the population's impression that they were being treated like zoo animals. Lost barrels added to the narrative of disorganized and misinformed bureaucracy. It is during times of disaster when cooperation is most needed between establishments and the media. The abuse of power to neglect time, environmental impacts, and international relations was a key reason Seveso became so horrifying.